Yeah, James Edwards. I'm Director of Governance, Planning and Strategy at Midland Credit Management, a specialty finance company based in San Diego. As you can probably tell, that's not my hometown. My hometown where I was born is actually Haarlem in the Netherlands, just outside of Amsterdam. But my hometown where I grew up is a place called Cricklade in the UK, which is a tiny little village out in the English countryside. So, but yeah, nowadays I'm based in San Diego, just like you, Aaron. So.
Thanks for being here, James.
Yeah, I'm Shyam Menon. I work for Mitek Systems. I lead machine learning and fraud product for Mitek. I am based in Atlanta. My hometown is a town called Trichy in southern India. That's where I was born. And yeah, happy to be here and join you.
Reshma?
Hey everyone, my name is Reshma Shetty. I am from the Bay Area, right here. I've been here more than 20 years, but my hometown is a coastal city called Mangalore in India. It's a southern India. I work at ServiceNow. I'm a senior director of engineering at Connected Customer Experience organization, leading all the learning platforms in digital technology.
Thanks, Reshma.
Hey everyone, Nikhil Gulati. I'm actually based here in the Bay Area. I'm local. I work for Johnson & Johnson Metek. I lead engineering and AI for our global digital surgery platform. And my hometown is New Delhi, India. So I'm on the north side of India.
Great. So thank you all so much for being here. Encore Capital is one of the largest. Explain Encore, because I don't want to get it wrong.
Sure, yeah.
I know what you guys do intimately.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're primarily a debt collection company. We buy non-performing loans from other financial services providers, and then we collect on those loans.
So the world's largest debt servicer with subsidiaries around the globe. Great, thank you. And then Mitek, all of you guys use Mitek. They provide the global infrastructure for imaging for financial services. So every time you take a photo of your check, that's one of Mitek's many products. So everybody's familiar with Mitek. Did you want to give a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so we primarily operate in the area of, one aspect is what Aaron just mentioned. The other is identity verification and fraud prevention. And so we validate, authenticate identities both through documents and biometrics. And we are generally part of onboarding flows at most of the financial institutions that you know of.
Great, and I'm sure everybody knows ServiceNow, where Reshma is. It's my former employer, and in fact, when I joined Opaque, one of the first people I called to try to recruit to Opaque was Reshma. But she said no, alas. But I'm very grateful to have ServiceNow as a customer and Reshma on that project. But I don't know that anybody needs an explanation on that. So J&J, would you do a quick intro on?
Yeah, J&J is huge. So we are the world's largest diversified healthcare company. But I'm part of Metek, especially around in surgery business, and we are globally tackling surgery, especially around robotic surgery, and that's part of my portfolio for software and hardware.
All right, so I'm going to ask the first question, which is take us back to a moment when trust us stopped being good enough for a project or an AI program that really required something that was more tangible evidence in order for you to unlock value. And I don't know, since I've got a bunch of questions, raise your hand and I'll let you go. Shyam.
Yeah, so I think it's not really a moment. I think it's an ongoing hurdle, at least in the space that I operate in, because we deal with very sensitive data. Like I said, it's PII data, it's biometric data, it's generally financial histories. They are generally protected by kind of the highest level of regulations. So the ability to kind of extract insights out of those data sets is incredibly hard. And generally in fraud, and those who follow the fraud domain, I think one of the hardest things to really do in fraud is to build kind of a composite picture across organizations, and most of the fraudsters operate across different enterprises. So you have to have the ability to actually look at what they're doing in one place and put that together with what they're doing at another institution. But the problem with the nature of the data is that sharing is actually prevented by regulation, competitive sensitivities, liability issues, et cetera, et cetera. So that is an ongoing challenge, which is why, confidential computing and what Opaque is doing is so interesting for us in terms of moving the goalpost in the work that we do, and that we're able to actually derive way more value in terms of just purely fraud prevention by extracting some of those insights that we can today. So I don't think we have crossed that hurdle just yet, at least on the fraud side, but that's what I would point to in my domain, at least.
Thanks, Shyam. Nikhil.
Yeah, I think I agree with Shyam. It's like a single moment, but healthcare industry has dealt with sensitive data for decades. I think two things that I've been observing have changed in the last 5 years is there's always been this default answer to don't move the data where it was generated, keep it locked, because to protect sensitive information. Forget about sharing, but it's like I can't even move it to a cloud because we don't know what happens, who accesses it, what's a verifiable trust in your words. So I think that trend has changed, and the reliance on anonymizing sensitive information is going away because of the multimodal nature of the data. You got videos, you got images, you got complex streams coming in. So no one can. It's very hard to actually deterministically tell that this is completely desensitized. So you have two options left. A, you want to actually create more value by moving that data, sharing across different parties. So obviously your contracts would allow you to do that. And the second is you have to have a guaranteed technology behind it so that when you go to your regulators or compliance, that I know how to actually do it now. And we can create a verifiable source of it. So we applied these principles, especially around anonymizing these multimodal streams, especially when you do surgery, and it becomes no longer a conversation of why you're doing it. It becomes question: show me how would you do it, and what is the thing that I'm going to hold and actually use it as a proof. So it becomes huge for us to be able to take that step.
Thank you so much. James?
Yeah, I think for us a real turning point was when we started to see our regulators and auditors start to invest in their own AI tools. So then they're no longer doing sampling of the evidence we provide to them. They're checking every single thing. So that was a shift from, okay, compliance can be something we apply after the event, to compliance has to be built into the process itself and really embedded in kind of whatever we're doing. Because when they're using AI to find the things that we're not getting right, they're going to find all of them. So it no longer becomes a best endeavors approach. It has to be 100%. So.
They also have been using AI tools to generate very lengthy bespoke questionnaires that you have to process too. How's that been?
Absolutely, yeah, that's been interesting. We're in a bit of a battle there with they're using AI to generate the surveys they send us, and then we're using AI to respond to them. And I think we're just about tying on that at the moment. So.
Well, if only there were a way for you to actually provide verifiable evidence of what ran, where it ran, with policies, and to say, hey, listen, don't send me another survey, just here's the record. Here's the governance record, you can independently verify it, answer your own questions, instead of you getting these 52-page surveys that are AI generated. I saved the best for last. Reshma, would you share an example?
Yeah, ours came from data classification and our intense desire to provide solutions at scale. So we wanted to go out of providing these localized solutions with data anonymization or other traditional ways of dealing with this data, regulated data, and we wanted to bring it to a solution where it actually is at scale. So that was really the need for us that drove us into getting into confidential computing arena.
Yeah, and ServiceNow has really been a leader, particularly in the last year, releasing an AI control tower that allows you to track governance across all the different workflows. So this is quite a testament that as a leader in AI, ServiceNow has adopted confidential underlying it to provide these level of guarantees. Shyam, your models live on identity and fraud data, exactly what a lot of attackers would love to get their hands on, and regulators are very anxious to guard. How do you let AI work on data without ever exposing it and prove it to a customer that it stayed protected?
So today it's a narrative, right? There is no artifact that we point to and say, hey, here is the proof, right? But that's what's changing. So I mean, so if you went back about 10 years, if you had a fraud or decisioning model in financial services, all you had to give was the result, pass, fail, whatever. The last 10 years, it's slowly moved to explainability. Why? Right? Why did this pass? Why did this fail? Probably in the last couple of years, we get so many questions about how did you arrive at that decision? I think Nikhil mentioned that as well, right? And so, where did the data run? What did you run it against, right? What infrastructure did it run on? All these questions have become kind of part of that, what we consider model governance and providing that information back to customers. So that's the reason why the whole, that attestation piece of what confidential computing provides us is, so you're going from explainability, which, generally you can build an explainability layer on top of the models, but the integrity and traceability of what the model is doing is what confidential computing would provide us, right, as an artifact. Today, that's not the case, right? It's almost on a, they believe you kind of framework, at least because you really can't prove other than, an attestation that you provide from your legal team that this is how it is. But we are getting to a point with the work that opaque and companies like that are doing is, you can actually point to actual artifacts and say, hey, here is the proof. You don't need a signature from the compliance team to prove that this is how it was done. And so that's the change that is coming. We can see that on a day-to-day basis. We get questions around that. So at least from my point of view, 12 to 18 months from now, this is going to become like a necessity for all kinds of model governance teams that operate in this space, in the ID and fraud space. And like I said, and like you mentioned, the data is so sensitive that the regulators are incredibly, alert about any kind of movement that in their mind jeopardizes private citizen data. And so that's the challenge that we're trying to overcome, and that's why this is exciting for us.
That's really helpful, and I'm aware that the EU AI Act has a requirement for runtime proof, which rather than having an attestation at the time of deployment that there's a particular configuration, there's a requirement that was slated for an August timeline. It's now been pushed back to January of 2027. And I spoke with the executive director, Anna Tallis, who wrote it. And she's zooming in tomorrow to talk a little bit about this. But there's a requirement in the EU and then other nations requiring this type of runtime evidence, which I'm sure you guys are planning for. Nikhil, patient data carries HIPAA, FDA, zero tolerance for leakage. And you now have autonomous AI working on this data in production. What kind of verifiable proof did your healthcare governance team demand before they signed off beyond data state encrypted? Like what were the requirements that you're seeing emerge, and what got them comfortable?
As I said, healthcare industry has been handling these data sets for quite some time. And the choice was sometimes very simple. We don't want to manage PHI, right? So that means you have to go through the whole burden of actually ensuring that there's no PHI. We are changing the conversation. We are changing the concept. We do want to manage it because there's value in it. There's long-term value in connecting some of these data sets. So beyond standard governance, traceability, and what we call as audit logs, right? To Shyam's point, there is no single proof that you can point to. And the proof is actually becoming even more important because we're not just talking about data movement, we're talking about distributed processing. So you have data being generated at the provider side, and that's really local. You're going to do something on the provider side, then you're going to actually, if you have intention to move it out and bring it together to a place, you're going to put it in a cloud somewhere in a region. If you have regional policies, you have to first make sure that regional policies are met. We can't just take it and move it away. And that is going to be some processing there. Then maybe there's an agent doing that, or there's a process that you don't even know of because sovereign rules dictate that these policies must be run in a certain way by a certain vendor sometimes actually, which is what we learn all the time when we go to different regions. Then eventually you get an option to actually bring it where you are running your own solution and providing additional context to that data. You're giving it to an agent, or you're giving it to your data science team even manually trying to process that. So what's happening is that every step of that, you have different processing being happen. There is no way today, at least I know of, that you can actually say at every time when processing happened, what happened to that data set, what changed, who did it, which system did it, was it authorized to do it. There's nothing like that exists, because it's really about not movement of the data, but it's really processing at different steps of it. And if you can have that, I mean, that's really powerful. Then you don't have to explain the process. You just have to say, I know exactly what happened at each step, and that's why this is powerful.
Thanks, Nikhil. Reshma, ServiceNow is deploying agents across the largest enterprises globally. Many of these are regulated enterprises. So that makes ServiceNow an attack surface area for anybody who wants to get access to highly sensitive data across regulated industries globally. How does ServiceNow think about securing the product and creating verifiable proof for their downstream customers to prevent something like a SolarWinds?
Yeah. I mean, this is a foundational architectural challenge and a requirement that we solve by providing governance at different layers. So at a high level, we split it into three. One is preventative, one is runtime, and then the last one is more like detective after it's deployed, right? As a preventative, we not only do MCP scans, MCP server audits, and all of those, but we also get down to tool level. Instead of having an MCP deploy like 20, 50 tools that does whatever, we get into a fine-grained level of tool-level access. Can this tool actually read? Is it allowed to write, or is it just read? So you get that granular level of scanning even before we deploy. So that's more like a preventative. And then we have, Aaron mentioned earlier, AICT. So AICT is literally our governing body of the platform for agents. So you pretty much get a holistic view of what are the agents that's deployed, what is it doing even during runtime, realistic risk scores, who's accessing what. So you get that whole picture of the agents through our AICT. So that is during runtime, right? And then post, we also get into detective audits, immutable, cryptographically signed audit trails that you can export, customers can export and use it for compliance and audit section. So yeah, but ultimately this is like a constant ongoing thing that architecturally you have to be on top of, providing not just once you deploy, but even after you deploy, are your agents actually running? Are they obsolete? What access did it have? It is something to be looking at your AICD, for example, and be on top of it in an ongoing basis. Yeah.
I should mention that the confidential MCP that we announced today was a collaboration with the ServiceNow team, Anthropic, and some others. But the fine-grained action layer policy enforcement that's cryptographically enforced with confidential literally came out of collaborations as ServiceNow as a co-design partner. So really grateful working with you guys. James, you operate in one of the most regulated corners of the consumer finance market. You've got AI workflows, some classic ML and stuff. I know that you guys are still early in your agentic journey, touching consumer data in production today. How do you guys think through using, how do you think about transitioning to using agents, if you want to talk about that? I know that that's an interesting area that maybe you can talk about. And if not, then focus more on how you guys think about processing data pipelines that are highly sensitive information coming from every credit issuer on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we've always operated on the basis of trust but verify. And then I think as we move more into the world of AI, that becomes trust but verify, and then verify again, and then verify twice more.
We're strong proponents of don't trust, verify.
Yeah. So we are being very cautious with our, and we take our responsibility with the data that we look after very seriously, because it is very personal, sensitive information about people's personal finances, which is something we need to be very responsible with. So for us, it's about really making sure that we've got control of that through the whole life cycle, being able to monitor that from the moment that data comes into our possession to the moment we delete it, and then being able to evidence, along the way that we've taken great care of that at every step. So, every system that's interacted with, every agent that might have touched it, every human that might have interacted with it, are they really who we think they are? Is that system really doing what it should be doing? How do we protect that data through every step of that process? And that's where, the confidential computing capabilities and the attestation really helps us to be confident that we can track that all the way through the process at every step.
Thanks, James. So I'm going to open it up to all of you. There's a bunch of people here in the audience that are building AI, deploying agents. What's something that they should take down in the next 6 months that you're like, hey, start here or achieve this milestone? What would you recommend to the audience that are beginning their deployments around agents or data pipelines? Go ahead, Shyam.
I think I would say probably governance, structured governance. There has got to be an established structure, depending on what domain you are in terms of how you monitor what you're deploying, and both performance-wise and security-wise. And I think some of the structures that we have had previously, generally, they don't hold up in what we're seeing or what we are going to see in the next, kind of 12 to 18 months. And so that would be the first thing I would say. That you probably need to have a governance structure established within the organization that is actually quite robust. And from what she was saying, we have, obviously ServiceNow has done a pretty good job of doing that. So that would be a good example even for smaller organizations that, you don't need that scale, but you have to have something similar to that to make sure that what you're trying to achieve is actually achievable within the bounds of what is legal and ethical and moral even. And so that's that would be my first kind of.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And there's a CIO who's speaking here who I won't mention who she is because it's a publicly traded company. But one of the things she said to me recently at a lunch was, we're in a world where you have these Mythos class models that make it a certainty that your firewall is going to get infiltrated by an imposter agent. We know that these agents hemorrhage data just by virtue of how they're currently architected if they aren't running in a confidential environment with cryptographic enforcement. And we have this new emerging regulatory requirements around runtime proof. So there's really 3 factors here. Mythos class models all but guarantee you're going to get infiltrated. AI agents hemorrhage data in the current architecture and regulatory requirements. So focusing on governance and verifiability, Shyam, great point, as a starting point. Who wants to take a crack at what as a recommendation for the next 6 months for folks who are here?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Reshma.
I would start with data classification for sure. What is the data that you actually want in here? The other one, in addition to what he's already mentioned, is one of the challenges we saw while developing or implementing this is just aligning all the teams to actually understand what is this new model, new infrastructure, why is it different, what are the risks on cost versus gains, things like that, right? So I would say this is not just an engineering team building. You want your ops, your compliance, your CI/CD, you want everybody to be in line. So definitely start working across for your architecture and your whole pipeline to be in with you and to really understand the model and the design that you want to put.
Yeah, I was going to actually say something completely different. I think you should invest in building a very small adversarial team. You should figure out how to break your own system first. What are the things that can go wrong before anyone else asks the question, whether it's compliance, legal, privacy, whoever, ISRM, security. You should just invest in that small tiger team. Don't do it on your production data. So obviously, but try to actually figure it out. All your data pipelines, your models, how they're running. If you're running agents, what would break where is the surface? You should do that experiment as an engineering and team if you are running one. And so we are investing there. And I think there's a lot of experimentation required in this world because you just don't know what you don't know. There's a lot of stuff coming at you.
James.
Yeah, I think I'd kind of add to that to say find the areas of your business where you can experiment, the stuff that isn't customer facing, the stuff that's maybe lower risk, and use that to iterate and build out those processes, and then make sure that you've got all of those protections and that governance in place when you then take on the more risky stuff.
Thank you, James. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to this session. Really appreciate you joining us. And we'll turn it over to the next session.